Who is Novalis? Who was Novalis? Well, Novalis is a pen name. It is the pen name used by a historical individual, Friedrich von Hardenberg, who was born May 2nd, 1772, and who died at age 29 in 1801. He assumed the pen name Novalis in 1798, so the name was used only for 3 years. It is a name that comes out of Hardenberg family history. He didn't make it up or receive it as a token of an initiation. Roughly translated, the name means one who opens the way, who clears new ground for cultivation, or more simply put, a pioneer. It has connotations of exploration and compassionate, future-oriented activity. And by the way, he pronounced the pen name Novalis, and that's how the family pronounced it. But, we Americans commonly say Novalis, and that's why I say it that way. It's very common to forget that Novalis is a pen name. That's because after Friedrich von Hardenberg assumed the name Novalis for his writings, his identity as the poet Novalis overwhelmed all the other aspects of his biography. And then, with his early death, people began to mythologize his poet biography, as you see in this idealized bust where he looks like he's been very serious about his gym membership. In many ways, it is true that Novalis's life resembles a fairy tale, but this is something that Novalis thought should happen. He thought that we, as spiritual beings who have awakened to the truth of our human reality, he thought that we have it in our imaginative power to shape our lives like poetry, or like a novel, or like a fairy tale. In fact, Novalis would have said that we are doing this magical, idealist, poetic activity all the time, consciously or unconsciously. Good poetry, bad poetry. Fairy tales that make us sick, or fairy tales that heal us. We are either awake to this creative spiritual aspect of our human beingness, or we are not. And as soon as we awaken to the truth of our human beingness, we have recognized our magical idealist identity as poets in that case, so to speak. Now, Novalis has frequently been referred to as a seer, as the herald of a new age, or as an apostle of renewal for the Christian mystery. But of course, Novalis is also a name which for students of secular humanist literature like me is synonymous with early German Romanticism. And this is a period in that late 18th century in Central Europe that is the literary fountainhead of anthroposophy. This is the time that Rudolf Steiner refers to when he talks about Goethe's fairy tale, for example. If we think about the origins of anthroposophy, anthroposophy as we know it from Rudolf Steiner and according to Rudolf Steiner, arises from a fairy tale. That would be Goethe's fairy tale of the green snake and beautiful lily, written in 1795. A fairy tale that arises during the decade of Novalis and the decade of early Romanticism. Steiner called Goethe's fairy tale the germinal seed of the anthroposophical movement. And Novalis is very much a part of this moment in which the germinal seed of the anthroposophical movement is planted on the earth. Goethe and Novalis were inspired from the same spiritual source. So, in a literary sense, if we place Goethe on one side and Novalis on the other, in between these two poets, we have Rudolf Steiner and anthroposophy. Now, to make this a bit clearer, here is a map of Novalis country in Central Europe. You might also call this territory ground zero for anthroposophy. Here it is again, in respect to Europe, including Britain and Scandinavia, and Russian-influenced countries. And now the detail again. As I said, this area is ground zero for anthroposophy, especially in a literary sense. And we are the section for Literary Arts and Humanities, right? This is Parzival country, where you see the Wartburg Castle. Wolfram von Eschenbach wrote portions of Parzival in the Wartburg Castle. Martin Luther translated the New Testament into German in the Wartburg Castle. The castle, this is the same castle where the hero of Novalis's novel Heinrich von Ofterdingen lives at the beginning of the novel, which, by the way, is set during the time of Parzival in the Middle Ages, during the Crusades. Bach's birthplace, the composer, is in Eisenach. This is also Goethe country. Here's Weimar. Fichte and Schiller country, Jena, Weimar. Rudolf Steiner country, Weimar. You know he worked in the Goethe archives, right? That's where he got his start, in a certain sense. And it's just a little bit to the east of here, about 50 miles. We have the landscape of Jakob Böhme. Up here is Grüningen. That's the home of Sophie von Kuhn, Hardenberg's fiancée, the famous Sophie. And here is Weissenfels, where the Hardenberg family relocated when he was 13. Leipzig, here, where he attended the university. And Freiberg, the mining academy, where he studied. Novalis, by the way, was born just a bit north in a small town called Oberwiederstedt, whose name carries a memory of the Norse god Vidar. Some of you may know about Vidar. I don't have time to talk about Vidar tonight, but maybe in Manitoba. So we're looking at an area about 150 miles east-west and 100 miles north-south. And that's the entire area in which Novalis lived his life. And as I said, this is also ground zero for anthroposophy in a literary sense. It's right in the middle of things, but isolated at the same time. And it's not a very big area, but great transformative world events don't necessarily require a vast stage or a large cast of characters or some grand institution. Usually it's just the opposite. In fact, it was one of the Romantics' leading ideas that great and decisive changes in culture and society arise from a very small group of friends, and emphasis on friends, people who like each other and who get along and know how to get along, and most importantly, friends who inspire and challenge each other and who are creative, imaginative, and curious and open to the future, and who don't get bogged down in procedural details or grand agendas or worry too much about doom and gloom. Novalis was part of such a small, friendly group, by the way. He was at its center. He was what we like to call a solar individual, very sunny and energetic and optimistic. People felt better when he was around. He made them happy. But the circle was very small. This constrained area of the map was his entire outward world. But for the Romantics, quality is more important than quantity. Ideas and inspirations work homeopathically. That was the idea. Think globally, act locally. Remember that old saying from the old days? So let's look again at his portrait from his mature years. Now, if I were doing this presentation in a university literature class, I would pause at this point and I would ask the students to write a poem or a paragraph, maybe, of their impressions, or just a list of adjectives. How does the portrait speak to you? And I don't know, looking at it now and free associating, words like energy, beauty, poise, alertness, looking away, humor, equanimity, a flair for fashion, youthfulness, mindfulness, as we say these days, eagerness, lack of reserve, goodness, and a certain androgynous quality, I would also add, along with many other things. Now, you can meditate on this portrait on your own. Until the age of 9, Hardenberg was unremarkable. He was very dreamy as a child and not at all awake intellectually. Very much under the influence of the mother, you might say. And the father worried about his son's future. What was he going to do with Fritz? And then at age 9, Fritz came down with a life-threatening illness and was very close to death and sick for quite a while. But when he recovered, he was transformed, he was alert, awake, and active. Now, we like to talk about the spirit eye taking hold, and I think that makes a lot of sense. But also in psychological terms, you might see this as a shift from the realm of the mothers to the realm of the fathers. Both are very important. Now, young Fritz soon outpaced his siblings at learning after he passed through this crisis, or moment of initiation, we might call it. He could not learn enough. He studied everything, even the most tedious subjects, but he had an abiding love for stories and poetry. His father sent him to Jena to study law, and at Jena he met Schiller. Schiller was really, I would say, his spiritual father. Novalis revered Schiller. Schiller and Schiller's ideas of history and the being human were formative and decisive for the poet to be. Novalis cared for Schiller when Schiller was sick. He was really head over heels in awe of Schiller. But Jena wasn't working out from the perspective of getting a solid career and a job, so the father yanked him out of school and sent him to Leipzig to study law. That was a bad idea. Leipzig was known at that time as Little Paris. It was a party town. And Fritz, young Friedrich, lived it up even more. He had affairs, he flirted. His brothers used to call him Fritz the Flirt, and he called himself that as well. And he got engaged. But he also met Friedrich Schlegel. Oh, and when I said he got engaged, I didn't mean to Sophie. He met Friedrich Schlegel there, who was another formative person in his education. Now, Schlegel was only 2 months older than Hardenberg, but he acted like the elder brother, and Hardenberg deferred to him in that way. It was kind of a country mouse, city mouse situation. And you might say that from Schiller, young Friedrich learned the way of Apollo, the high road of sunlit Greece. If you know anything about Schiller, you'll understand what I mean. But from Schlegel, on the other hand, he learned the mysteries of Dionysius. He learned about the night world of the chthonic gods. And maybe we'll have time to talk about this at the festival. He called Schlegel the high priest of Aloysius. Schlegel awakened his mind to critical philosophy. Schiller, on the other hand, taught him reverence for human dignity, freedom, and beauty, whereas Schlegel played a role kind of like Mephistopheles to Faust. And young Friedrich adored him just as much as he loved Schiller. Now, I should mention this. Another very important friend was Ludwig Tieck. Tieck is someone that Rudolf Steiner, by the way, talked about in several lectures and recommended highly. Novalis met Tieck toward the end of his life. Novalis had a well-connected uncle who wanted to take him to the northern part of Germany and launch him into high society and a flashy career. But the father decided that his son should stay closer to home and in the country. So he sent Fritz to Tennstedt to apprentice in a law office, more or less. That's what you would call it. He became a law clerk, kind of like what, actually, it was kind of like what Owen Barfield had to do, a steady office job, very boring. But as with everything that Fritz took up, he embraced this boredom and tedium with enthusiasm. I would say he knew how to master the art of boredom. He had the ability to penetrate even the driest and most stifling subjects and enliven them. So, long story short, there he was, a young man of vast potential, vast talent, keen intelligence, boundless energy, and a very lively libido, living in a hick town, working as a law clerk, in a kind of very minor government job, living in a boarding home as an apprentice, and awaiting the call of destiny. He was a big fish in a small pond, you might say, a bird with very strange plumage. And shortly, he met his destiny. You know the story. Less than a month after arriving in Tennstedt, in the autumn of 1794, he encountered Sophie, who was just past her 12th year, 12 years old. And in a quarter of an hour, as Novalis reported, he fell in love and decided that he would marry her. And his life forever changed. He discovered his higher self and identity. He became Novalis, but not all at once. And that's what my book is about. How did Hardenberg become Novalis? It's all told in the book, and it's mostly told in his own words. So I won't talk about that now because I want to keep this introduction brief, and I hope that I have said enough to give you an idea that Novalis and his early romantic friends were all about initiative. And I hope, too, that perhaps I've given you some idea why Rudolf Steiner placed so much emphasis on Novalis, especially for this century. At the conference this August, the plan is to work artistically, accent on artistically, with one of the fairy tales, or maybe more than one, that Novalis wrote. We'll have to see how many people are actually interested in the process. We'll probably work with the fairy tale Hyacinth and Rosebud. This might change, as I said, depending who gets involved. So if you're interested, and you know you're interested, you should contact me or Patricia Dixon. And if you want to get an idea how the section has worked with Novalis artistically and with the Novalis fairy tales, coming up right at the end of this video are two excerpts of section performance videos. One is from Hyacinth and Rosebud, and the other is an excerpt from a fairy tale called Atlantis that Novalis wrote. And if that gets you interested even more, you can watch the complete versions of those fairy tales in either English or in German. Choose your flavor. I have the English translation by me, and I have the original German as well. And you can find those videos by going to the section website, which is theliteraryarts.com. The literary arts is all glommed together as one word. Thank you for your attention. That's all I have to say. I always enjoy talking about Novalis, and I hope this has answered some of your questions.
poor child who has not yet loved. With the first kiss, a new world opens to you, and with it, life enters your enraptured heart in manifold radiance. I want to tell you a fairy tale. Listen. Hyacinth and Rosebud, a Märchen by Novalis.
Long ago, there lived far to the west of here a very young fellow, good, but extremely odd. This young person worried himself continually about this little nothing or that little nothing. He always walked in silence. He stared straight ahead. He sat down alone by himself when other youngsters played happily. He brooded upon strange things. Caves and forest were his favorite haunts. There he chatted with beasts and birds, with trees and rocks. But of course, if you or I had been there, we would not have heard one sensible word, only silly nonsense to make a person laugh to death. Thus, the youth continued, always moody and serious. The squirrel, the monkey, the parrot, and the bullfinch could not amuse him. Despite their best attempts, they could not change his broody ways. How they tried! The goose told stories. The brook jingled a ballad. A great thick stone cut ridiculous capers. The rose stole lovingly about him and twined so tenderly through his hair. And the ivy stroked his troubled brow. But his melancholy was stubborn. His parents were much troubled and did not know what to do. He was in good health and ate well enough. They had never done anything to make him angry, and until a few years ago, he had been the liveliest and the merriest of his friends. First in all the pranks, and a favorite with the girls. He was very handsome as a picture book prince. Ah, yes, and he danced like an angel.
Now among the young girls there was one, a charming beauty.
There is another tale, one not so wonderful, and from older times. Perhaps you will enjoy it, and it will give you more insight into the wonderful art.
An old king presided over a court so splendid that people streamed to it from far and wide. Here they found abundance and plenitude, food, music, decorations, and diversions, masks, pageants, dramas, and spectacles, jolly amusements day and night, and in addition, learned persons of wit and wisdom, whose conversation roused the human spirit.
The old king, who was otherwise a strict man of stern demeanor, had two motivating passions, thanks to which his court owed its grace and splendor. The first of these motivating passions was love for his daughter, for his daughter reminded him of his beloved wife, who had died early. For love of his daughter, the king strove to create an earthly paradise.
His second delight was poetry and poets. As a boy, he read literature passionately, and as an adult, he spent a fortune to stock his library with poetry of every language. He reveled in the company of singers. He sought them out from all corners of the compass, graced them richly with wreaths of honor, and never wearied of their songs.
Music